Let's be honest, the first Tango phone, Lenovo's Fab 2 Pro, was pretty lousy. Thankfully, Asus didn't feel the need to rush, so its new world-sensing Zenfone AR improves on that first attempt by almost every measure that matters, and it doubles as a Daydream-compatible VR machine too. But does that mean it's a phone worth spending your well-earned cash on? Well, let's take a closer look. First up, the hardware. It's been a while since we've seen a smartphone wrapped in faux leather, but whatever. The rest of its body is made of metal and glass, and it all feels more than sturdy enough. If nothing else, this leather trim makes a squarish slab of a phone feel different from all the other expensive smartphones of its generation. That's a good thing too, since the Zenfone otherwise doesn't really earn many style points. The rest of the physical package honestly feels like a mixed bag. The Zenfone gets the nod for packing a classic headphone jack, but it's also in no way water resistant. There's also a fingerprint sensor embedded in the physical home button, but it was perceptibly slower than other devices at granting me access. Thankfully, what's inside counts for much more, namely a Qualcomm Snapdragon 821 chipset with an Adreno 530 GPU. Yeah, we know, that sounds a little last year. There's still plenty of life in the silicon though, and this time it's paired with either 6GB of RAM and 64GB of storage, or 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage. That's the model we're working with, and it's been more than enough to ably run Android 7.0 Nougat, even with all the crazy Zen UI choices made here. Fans of stock Android will want to run, not walk, away from this thing. There are myriad customization options, from support for themes and icon packs to tweaks for the way your launcher runs and much more. Some people will probably appreciate all these options and add-ons, but me, I would prefer a little more subtlety. Now, I didn't really see this one coming, but the Zenfone's 5.7-inch AMOLED screen is one of the best things about it. Viewing angles are great, everything is super crisp thanks to its 2K resolution, and Asus has offered some of the most thorough screen calibration options I've ever seen on a phone. Not only can you swap the uber vibrant super color mode for a more conservative palette, you can also fiddle with the hue and saturation until you've got things just right. The Zenfone's single speaker is surprisingly good too. It produces sound that's plenty loud and meatier than you'd expect, but it does best for songs with strong mids and spoken stuff like podcasts. But of course, no tour of a Tango phone would be complete without a pit stop at the camera cluster. This time we're working with Asus's TriCam system, which, marketing speak aside, combines a 23-megapixel main shooter with cameras that measure motion and depth. You're probably going to use that main camera with more regularity than most Tango apps, and thankfully, it's a lot better than I had hoped. Expect lots of crisp colors, solid detail, and generally on-point exposure. And that also goes for when you're in low light too, thanks to the 4-axis optical image stabilization and multiple autofocus methods. Asus might have gone a little overboard with the camera modes though. When you put aside the typical pro and manual stuff, there are still 18 more modes. Some, like HDR Pro and Super Resolution, which combines multiple images into one highly detailed one, are legitimately useful. Others, like the Depth of Field mode, which does not use the Tango technology, leaves a lot to be desired. I found few of these options worth using regularly, but I guess there's something to be said about the camera's flexibility. Now, about that Tango stuff. Google sold us a vision of a future with devices that could sense where they were in space and what was around them. It's a brilliant, potentially game-changing move that Google's biggest rival is embracing too, but, well, the game hasn't been changed yet. It's been a little less than a year since the first Tango phone launched, and the number of available apps hasn't grown that much. There are around 50 now compared to the 40-ish we could use in 2016. Some of Tango's functional issues haven't been solved either. A decent chunk of the software you can use has a difficult time keeping track of the surfaces around you. The utilitarian apps haven't really changed much. You can still measure things with some degree of accuracy, or plot virtual furniture into the space around you to see how it fits. Maybe the most impressive new addition comes from BMW, which lets you virtually poke around a mostly life-sized i3 or i8. You can even fire up the windshield wipers. I'm still waiting for some truly useful Tango apps though. I'm not really holding my breath. Tango games like Fantageist remain a lot of fun, but they also highlight some of the biggest challenges for developing Tango content. Enemy orbs still float through walls the phone should be able to detect, and there's nothing to keep you coming back once the novelty wears off. Unfortunately, the current crop of Tango apps lend themselves well to being used once or twice for kicks, and never again. At least those apps all run pretty well. Thanks to the Zenfone's additional horsepower, most of the performance hiccups I noticed with the Fab 2 Pro last year didn't pop up again. That's probably due just as much to developers fine-tuning things as it is to this improved hardware, but either way, augmenting reality is starting to feel as seamless as it should. Emphasis on starting to. The phone runs very well outside of AR mode too. Multitasking was a cinch even with lots of apps running thanks to the huge amount of RAM the Zenfone packs. Playing through visually intense games both on-screen and in a Google Daydream headset worked very well too, though you'll notice occasional moments of sluggishness and some graphical tearing when the phone gets pushed to the edge. While a Snapdragon 835 would have been nice, the power on display here most likely won't make you feel like you're missing out. I do wish the battery was a little better though. Despite using a 3300 mAh battery, the Zenfone AR just barely got me through most workdays. Unless you're very judicious, you'll have to charge this thing promptly every night. The Fab 2 Pro went down in history as the first Tango phone you could actually buy, but the Zenfone AR has nabbed itself a different prize. It's the first Tango phone that's actually worth using, as long as you don't mind the rest of its quirks. And there are, after all, a lot of them. Still, it's worth repeating that the Zenfone AR isn't for everyone. It's meant more for people who would rather peek at the potential of augmented reality than for those who would rather just have an all-around excellent smartphone.